Counted cross-stitch is probably the most popular form of hand needlework. Cross-stitch transfers a design from a pattern onto even weave fabric. Each symbol on the pattern represents one X on your fabric. The shape of the symbol tells you the color. For the chart we're working on, each square symbol will be an X stitched in blue. The symbol 5 will be an X stitched in yellow, and so on. Embroidery floss is made up of 6 individual strands of thread. Cut a length of floss about 18 inches in length. Then pull out individual threads one at a time. This will make your stitches lay neater on your fabric. Cross-stitch uses a tapestry needle. A tapestry needle has a large eye, so it's easier to thread. It also has a blunt tip. To thread your needle, you can use a needle threader, or you can pinch the thread over the eye of the needle to make it easier to thread. To start stitching, bring the needle up from the back of the fabric, leaving a 1-inch tail on the back. Stitch one diagonal of the X. Stitch over the tail of thread on the back for the first few stitches. Never use knots on the back of your fabric. Continue to stitch just half of the X for the entire row. When you reach the end of the row, work back, completing the X. It does not matter which direction the top of the X slants, but you want all of your stitches to slant in the same direction, otherwise your stitching will appear uneven. If we were stitching on 14 count Aida, which is a good fabric to begin on, we would use 2 threads. To make it more visible for our video, we are going to use 6 strands of floss on 6 count fabric. The count of the fabric simply means how many stitches there are in 1 inch. Our website has a cross-stitch calculator that will help you determine the number of threads to stitch with and the size of the tapestry needle to use. The store where you purchase your materials will also be happy to help you with this. When you've completed all the X's on the first row, simply drop down 1 row and stitch the next row. Again, just stitch 1/2 of the X for each stitch on the row, then complete the X on your way back. When you've completed an area or have run out of thread, you will need to end off. Turn your piece over and run the needle under 4 or 5 stitches and trim the tail. You never use knots on the back of your stitching. Your stitches will be more even if you use some type of hoop or frame to hold your fabric. We are using a Q-snap frame, but you can also use a scroll frame or a plastic embroidery hoop. You will find it is easier to stitch the rows from the top to bottom. Sometimes when you move to a different color or area, you will need to count to find where to start stitching. This is easy to do. Start stitching the new area the same as before. Bring your needle up from the back of the fabric, leaving a 1-inch tail which you stitch over to secure the thread. Stitch half of the X on a row, then work back to complete the X's on that row. Your stitches should lay flat on the fabric without distorting the fabric. It's easy to pull your thread too tightly. Stitch a row with less tension to see if the stitches look better. If you run out of thread before you complete an area, just run your needle under a few stitches on the back to end off. To start stitching again, you don't have to catch the tail like we've shown before. All you need to do is run your needle under a few stitches on the back of the fabric, similar to how we ended off, and continue stitching. Keeping your stitching neat on the back will help when you try to frame or finish your project. In addition to the regular cross stitch, many designs will call for back stitching. Back stitching is a running stitch used to outline a color or to make lines. Back stitching is always done last. On our design, the strings for the balloons and the words are done in backstitch. Usually backstitching is done with half the strands that you used to make the X's. Start by anchoring your thread as before. When you backstitch, you make a stitch for each time the pattern crosses over an intersection of the grid on the graph. Usually you will not skip over more than 2 spaces, but that depends upon your pattern. I hope you found this video helpful. A printed version of this lesson is available on our website. Be sure to visit your local needlework store. They love stitching and will be happy to answer any questions. They can also help you find that perfect project to get started stitching.